Okay, this might be one of my favorite teaching strategies. And most of you have probably heard of discrete trial training. Maybe you've heard of it as the acronym DT or DTT or DTI or discrete trial instruction. Those are all the same thing. We can use those terms interchangeably. Today I'll use DT or discrete trial because that's how I learned it. So it's what's easiest for me. You might already be using a curriculum that has a discrete trial teaching strategy built in, like STAR or LINCS. But you don't need a curriculum to use this strategy. Anybody can use it with the materials you already have. Why should we use discrete trial? It's a strategy that can be used to teach any discrete skill, and that's a skill requiring one response. It provides repeated exposure or intensive instruction on a needed skill. It breaks down the skill or the behavior into separate steps that have a clear beginning, middle, and end, and it consists of repeated trials with the learner receiving reinforcement for responding correctly. You can teach so many different types of skills with this strategy. You can teach academic skills, social skills, language and communication skills. There's so many things that we can teach. A firm gives 7 reasons to use discrete trial that are identified in the research. If you use this strategy or you are using it, you've probably discovered even more. So one reason is that it increases overall responding for students. It improves their ability to respond to questions, increases academic skills, increases perspective taking ability, increases verbal communication, it increases emotional recognition, and it increases adaptive behavior skills. Think about your students and their needs. Does this sound like a list of skills that probably all of our students could use? So there's kind of our basis for why we should use discrete trial. I wish I had time to give you more about discrete trial. I feel like we're just kind of doing a quick drive-by, and we really are, because this is part of a bigger instructional strategies training. But now we have the basic overview of what it is and why we would use it. Let's look at how. Discrete trial has 3 main components that you see on the slide. There's the instructional cue, or what we're asking the student to do, also known as the antecedent. There's the student response, or the behavior. And when we're giving a student a cue, they have 3 different ways they can respond. They can give a correct response, they can give an incorrect response, or there could be a no response. And then the consequence is what we do, or it's our response as educators. That can be us reinforcing for a correct response, using an error correction procedure that we just talked about if they didn't respond correctly or they didn't respond at all. And you might, as a note, you might see error correction referred to as corrective feedback when you look at the discrete trial research and dig into it. It's the same thing. We're going to use error correction because that's what we've used throughout this training. So let's think about what that would look like for Mila. She's working on the kindergarten standard of demonstrating basic knowledge of one-to-one letter-sound correspondence by producing the most frequently used sound for each consonant. So we can identify the grade level standard that we're working on. Then we've noticed that in small group for the past 2 days, Mila struggled to respond to the prompt, "What is this sound?" when shown the letter. The reason for that is probably because she had learned her letter names prior to learning the sounds. So she responds with the name of the letter instead of the sound. Since she's not being successful in the small group and she needs more specially designed instruction in this specific task of what sound is it, we're going to work with her one-on-one in a discrete trial strategy We'll provide opportunities for reteaching, multiple exposures. We're going to just pull that skill from the small group and work on it one-on-one in discrete trial. We'll heavily reinforce that skill in that setting. And we're really going to try to help her understand the academic routine and respond to the instructional cue, "What sound is this?" So we know she knows her letter sounds, but we want her to respond to that cue because that's what the teacher's using in the small group. We're going to know she's mastered that skill when she is responding correctly 3 out of 3 trials for 3 consecutive days. And when she's doing that and she's reached mastery, we can push her back into that small group with this skill that she's now learned, and she can generalize it there. Okay, so we've got the kindergarten standard and we have our learning target, right? What we're going to work on in discrete trial. To fill in the rest of the table, here's what the instructional cue looks like. The teacher's going to present a letter flashcard and say, what sound is this? And you can note out to the side that we're going to begin with known phonemes. The goal at this point isn't to teach new sounds, but we could use a discrete trial strategy to teach new sounds. But first, we're just going to work on the sounds that she knows. We want her to respond by saying the correct sound, but she might not. She might say the incorrect sound or the letter name instead, since that's the error she's been making. Or she might not respond at all. All of those we need to also think about and plan for. And then the consequence, remember, this is what we do. This is our response. In the case of a correct sound, we're going to immediately reinforce her. Great job. The sound is ah, penny on, if we're using a penny board, which a lot of times is typically used in discrete trial or some other one-to-one reinforcement. In the case of an incorrect or no response, which is extremely likely right now, we'll provide corrective feedback using the error correction procedure we talked about earlier. So if Mila says A, the name of the letter instead of the sound, I might say, the sound is ah. What sound is this? And I'm expecting her to respond with ah. One thing that's really important is that I keep using that same cue every time. What sound is this? Because that's what I'm trying to teach. That's the skill I'm trying to teach. But I don't want to be confusing. So I'm going to keep it to the fewer words, the better. Even when I error correct, I'm probably not going to say, no, that isn't right. It's ah. I'm just going to cut the extra out. I'm just going to say, this is ah. What sound is it? So that she's not having to filter out the rest of that verbal information I'm giving her. She can really just focus on the very important part, and especially that cue that I'm giving. And just like we talked about earlier, I'm going to need to plan to fade the prompt, and that can usually be done pretty quickly in a one-to-one discrete trial setting. Once Mila is responding correctly to that instructional cue, what sound is it, without prompting, I can then use this lesson to pre-teach phonemes to prepare her for small group, or I can use it as a reteach strategy for those errors that she's making in the small group. And then once again, she'll go back to the small group to generalize and practice those skills. Like I said, I really would like to go deeper into discrete trial. This is just a real quick overview. If you're wanting to know get more information about how to use discrete trial, Affirm, MAST, and AIM all have modules on this topic that can easily be found in a Google search. And you're welcome to dig deeper there. And if you need more details, we also like to nerd out about discrete things like discrete trials. So if you ever want to do that, just let us know.